Welcome to Tamriel Rebuilt's YouTube channel. Video updates. This is more of an audio update, I guess. Today I'm speaking with Sload. He is a longtime TR member. You've been around since God knows when. When did you join? You joined well before I did.
2005. I was like 14,
Yeah,
maybe even. I don't. Wow, too young.
yeah.
Um,
It's weird. I think the average age. It's actually kind of weird because I think I joined in 2006 and I was 16 maybe. So the average age of like TR members at that point was either like 15 years old or like 30 years old,
right.
which is really, really kind of awkward when you think about it in hindsight.
Yeah, I think that it used to be like when I joined, there was sort of most people, especially people in leadership roles, were mostly in their mid 20s to
Yeah.
their mid 30s,
Yeah,
and then
very
they all
much.
kind of left and put the kids in charge, and then we kind of grew up doing this.
Absolutely.
Where
We need
it's
we need another crop of young children to corrupt.
That's right.
Um, yeah, I'm trying to think what are some of I remember Noir Grim, um, Steam, God, Lud. There's a bunch of old people well, they're not really old. They're just older than
Yeah,
me.
they were. I mean, they were about as old as we are right now.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh, Dexter, I haven't
yeah,
talked to him in years, and that's
yeah, and they still show up
something I
all the
regret.
time,
Yeah.
just randomly on the forums. So you joined back in 2005, and you are now sort of, I guess, developing, I guess, a lot of the conceptual sort of design and sort of the story design of some of the great houses. Basically, the storylines that we're going to have that involve sort of great house politics, and um, I guess we don't really have a main quest per se in our mod. We just have a bunch of sort of faction quests, big faction quest lines that you're going to do. And today we're going to talk a little bit about House Redoran and House Indoril. Um, Now it's interesting because in the original game, um, you only come into contact with three of the great houses, and you sort of get a little preview, I guess, of Indoril in the Tribunal expansion. So it gives us, and obviously you don't see any of their mainland holdings, and um, the mainland holdings are really sort of what's important as far as the politics go, because Indoril is all mainland, and um, Telvanni are just weird, and Halalu are just very expansionist, and it gives us a lot of room to sort of come up with stuff. But there is some sort of basis for what we're supposed to go off of. There's some lore down, and you definitely get an idea of what the great houses sort of want to go towards um, with the content that's been released so far, and we want to stay true to that as much as possible. So we're talking about Halal, or not Halal, we're talking about Indoril and Redoran, which I guess are the two sort of very conservative great houses. And they're also really sort of involved with the Tribunal Temple. So what is sort of the difference between them? Because there are differences. Redoran is they're both conservative, but what sort of differentiates Redoran from Indoril?
Right. That's sort of the big difficulty in developing them, because in the original game, Indoril is only hinted at, but a lot of the space that is given to Indoril, Redoran also takes up in the original game, probably because Indoril wasn't present.
Hmm.
And so they both have this sort of uh, design of being both very devoted to the temple, um, very, like you said, conservative, sort of within Dunmer society, the sort of mainstream silent majority types that are contrasted with like the Falu, who are uh, traitors, and the Telvanni, who are weirdos, and the Dress, who are just stuck in ancient history.
Right.
And so uh, a lot of the work was figuring out how to make them different from each other. Um, and this is on sort of a conceptual, like on a level sort of below the quest lines, and also sort of underlying every aspect of how they're presented, from their NPCs and characters to also even their exteriors, and a lot of that was sort of done intuitively and just felt out, and was able to be like building off of what was in the original game. It sort of was hard, would have been hard to do wrong. Though we actually, I won't. So what we did, I think, to really differentiate them is that Redoran is associated with warrior classes in the original game, because
Right.
they're sort of
A militaristic,
a trinitarian structure
martial.
with the houses and the classes. And so that's sort of the emphasis with Redoran, is to be this more frontier, militial, defensive Morrowind, whereas Indoril plays more of a sort of administrative role, as being within the temple, like within the temple hierarchy itself, for the people who keep the laws and order within Morrowind, whereas Redoran is more concerned with defending Morrowind against its external enemies.
Right. And you mentioned here, because you have like some notes on the personality of the great houses, and for Indoril you mentioned the Byzantines, which and we had previously talked about, which I thought was really fantastic, because the Byzantines were very like, they were the keepers of, or they saw themselves at least as the keepers of, Greek and Roman tradition in a world that had really moved beyond that. And Indoril, in the same sense, is sort of the keepers of this sort of tribunal, temple-based Dunmer cultural tradition in a world that is really starting to move beyond the tribunal. So how does Indoril sort of, how do they fit in into a game, a game world, where the tribunal, because I mean, as we know, as you play through, the whole main quest is really centered around the downfall of the tribunal and moving Morrowind away from the worship of the tribunal back to ancestor worship.
Right. That's sort of like, because we don't have a main quest, I think one of the things that we want to do is to have the house quests, because the houses, you can only join one of them, and they're really a really good way for players to be able to identify their character and to sort of get to know a part of the world pretty intimately. Is to have them sort of be ways of trying to deal with Morrowind's sort of existential threats that the central game of Morrowind is all about, because like the main quest of Morrowind, the game that's set on Vardenfell, is about, and also the Tribunal expansion as well, it's about the failure of the Tribunal to protect Morrowind. It's about their sort of abandonment of the Dark Elves.
Right.
And about
their inability to really do anything about it.
Right, about Dagathur, and also about the Empire, which is increasingly influencing Morrowind's affairs, or King Helseth as well. And so, because the Indoril are so especially tied to the temple, they have a particularly hard time dealing with the fact that Morrowind is changing. And like you said, like the Byzantines were maintaining a tradition from that is now outmoded, that the Indoril are sort of investing even more heavily as time goes on in past ways of relating to things that just can't deal with the status quo that sort of changed around them, and they don't realize that the situation has changed.
Right.
And so they're very fragile in that way.
Right. So basically the player character is going to enter into this really tense sort of situation of needing to do something very drastic, or well, we won't even get into what the player character will have to do, because I think that's sort of further down the road as far as what's been developed. But basically entering into a situation of, it's an incredibly interesting time, because Indoril is very much in transition. And
Right, and I think that's something that's sort of it's shown in all three of the Great House quests in vanilla, is that there is the current head of house in each of those quests is somehow either conserved or just unable to deal with the present circumstances. I think that's kind of like
he's also off, isn't he? Don't aren't
What?
he's also offed, isn't he? Oh, at least in vanilla. I think in each case, doesn't the head of each great house end up getting killed
Right. Yeah, you have
as
to
well?
kill him
Yeah.
eventually. It's sort of the parallel between them because there's this sort of parallel structure where they're each, they have a very different internal dynamic, but they're sort of dealing with the same theme of a leadership that's unable to deal with their present circumstances. And so I think that's really where we wanted to sort of expand on that and make it a little more, both a little more nuanced and a little more in depth. I don't know if uh, there's this one thing that we have pretty set, but that I don't know if it's a spoiler. Are we
Oh,
allowed to do spoilers?
yeah, I was just thinking about it. I was like, oh, should we tell them or
Well, now
yeah,
we've talked about it, so we kind of,
yeah, well, I
yeah.
think it's okay.
Yeah, if people don't want spoilers, they should mute for the next 30 seconds. But so the head of House Indoril is actually dead, is um, which is symbolic of the
Right.
entire house situation, which is that he's dead and
No one's
uh,
talking about it or no one's
yeah,
admitting it.
sort of well, it's publicly known that he's ill or something, and so he can't make public appearances. But that at around the time the player steps off the boat and say to Neen, he dies, and the high-ranking members of Indoril are keeping that a secret so that the house doesn't just collapse in on itself with that sort of power vacuum that his death creates.
Right. And that's, I mean, it's really sort of indicative of the whole situation where the head of the house is dead, but we can't talk about it. We have to act like he's still alive.
Right,
Yeah.
and that's just, in the beginning of the game, the Tribunal aren't actually dead, but they're not present, like the sort of temple structure is going on without them because they never leave the sort of rooms that they're floating in.
Yeah. Well, so
Then
but still,
they can't make public appearances anymore because they're not powerful enough to be godly the way that they're supposed to.
right, right.
And
It's
so that's sort of when
yeah,
we're
go
dealing
ahead.
with someone who's mortal, the equivalent of that is just to be dead. And so the head of House Indoril is dead. Um,
So it's so Indoril is definitely in this sort of crisis mode. Now Redoran, they're in a slightly different situation. They're still, I think, tied to sort of the downfall of the tribunal, but their way of dealing with it is so much different because their way of dealing with anything is sort of just to like fight it and be very physical, and they're very kind of less subtle, and they're less involved in the politics of the whole situation. So how does Redoran kind of see themselves in this whole situation? What is sort of the the setting that Redoran are going to kind of have for the player character when they get there?
yeah, so I think that a thing that helped us with giving Ritter their character was that in vanilla dialogue, unlike the other houses, the Redoran Council is described as being the head council of House Redoran, which has moved to Vardenfell, and the head of the house is sort of described as having moved the council to Vardenfell, which means the mainland. Whereas in both Follow and Telvanni case, you sort of are just dealing with these like very provincial,
Right.
not actually that high level characters on Vardenfell, and then you go to the mainland and you're dealing with the
The real deal.
actual house. And Redoran, it's the reverse, is that the head of house and the councilors have all gone to Vardenfell, and so that's sort of the idea of them as being at war. That they've been at war for
Ever, basically.
past several hundred years. They've been at war with Dagathur, but it's sort of a cold war because they can't do anything about it. Vivek puts up the ghost fence to keep Dagathur in, but they don't know how to deal with
They can't actually defeat him,
right, because he's
finally.
too powerful and they don't have the prophecy behind them. Um, so
So it's a
their
very
head council is at war, which means that on the mainland they're sort of directionless. That allowed us to make them Ban Malur, which is called Blacklight by the Imperials, which is how most
and
people who've only seen Morrowind on maps would know it.
we do have pictures of Blacklight now, Bon Malor.
Yeah,
We'll put some of those up. I mean, and you can
which
see
is
them as well on our forums and I think also the Facebook page now.
yeah, and that's a great city that I think really captures Redoran's character by being, inside that sort of that structure with the rocks around it as being very defensive and very malicial.
Yeah.
Um, but so that's like sort of their largest and most important city, but it doesn't have like official
It doesn't have the
um,
political significance anymore that it
right
used to,
of
right?
the capitals of like Almalexia or of Narcissus, the capitals of the other houses.
Right, right.
And so Redoran have this sort of disjointed. Uh, they're not unified. They're not led by anyone because their leadership is in that Cold War situation on Vardenfell, and they're more like not political, more locally oriented, more family oriented, um, and just trying to deal with their own specific circumstances within each locality that Redoran exists in without sort of being able to unite as a house.
Right. So they also, I think you can also see that the differentiation between the two houses, uh, because you were talking about the architecture sort of of Bon Malor and it being a very defensive sort of martial style of architecture. And I think when you look at the difference between Indoril, if you go back towards the Thir River Valley and you see, much more sort of opulence and sort of buildings lose sort of their defensive utilitarian purpose and become more showy and more comfortable, sort of in where they're located. And then you go up to Redoran's territory. Redoran's territory is way up in, I don't know, what is it, like release map like 12 at this point? It's
53.
I think it used to be map 5. It's now I think map 7. I think release map 7. It's actually I think for anybody keeping up with the progress of the exterior making, doing a really good job. I think most of Redoran's territory is at this point, the exterior at least is completed, um, and we have Heartland completed as well. That's I think completely done as far as exteriors. I think there's still interiors to do for that, but when you look at what we've sort of built up there, in contrast to Heartland and in contrast to the Thir River Valley, it's much more wild and it's sort of a wilderness in a sense. It's not as settled. It's not as friendly, and the Redoran's structures are utilitarian in nature. They're defensive in nature. They have little forts and little guard towers all over the place, and it's not as sort of opulent. It's much more um, about defense and about fulfilling one purpose first, and that is to be defensible in case there's a fight or a war breaks out or something like that. So you really see that the difference in the house is separated. One is very soft, and the other is very sort of hard. Um, and so you see it played out in the architecture as well, which I think is
Right.
you know
And in
great.
the layouts of the cities as well, the Redoran cities are all sort of they're all fortified. There was a lot of thought in putting them to defensible locations, whereas Indoril cities are much more likely to be open without maybe not even having any walls at all
Yeah.
in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I think right now
Being
the player character can visit some Indoril settlements just in the new release, the 1.5 Sacred East release. I think
right.
you can go to Gorn. Of course, Akamora is there, and these are places that don't even. Or what's another Salen Vulgate, and these are
Is it
villages
still
that.
called
It's
Bosmora, the one in the south? I
that.
think that one is especially sort of open and
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So these are all open sort of villages that aren't really concerned about defense. They're not really worried about it. That's not really forefront in their minds. Whereas the Radaron, the first thing in their minds is sort of uh, protecting themselves against any
Right,
sort of
because
physical threat. Right.
yeah, and they're on the border, whereas the other cities are in sort of the heartland. Well, they're not in heartland, but they're in sort of the middle of Morrowind, away from its borders with Cyrodiil and with Skyrim, which they historically had wars with.
Right. Right. And so another interesting thing is that if you go up there in the Redoran territory, there is some level of Nordic presence, isn't there? Up that way.
Right, there's that idea that the old Rake area. that is
They
a
kind of have like
territory that was, I think, the basic idea is that
it
when
used
the
to
Empire,
be part of
yeah, it was part of
Skyrim, yeah.
Skyrim when Skyrim was independent, but when the Empire drew the borders of its provinces, Morrowind got it, and so Redoran is ruling it, but there's a lot of sort of Eridentist indigenous Nord communities, sort of like Solstheim, which is associated
Hmm.
with Morrowind, um, but is obviously a completely Nordic territory.
Right, right.
And so there's this sort of uh, a brewing conflict between the Nords who live in the northern part of the Veloth release and the Redoran who are in charge of controlling that region as part of their defense of Morrowind, but it's got Nords living in it who are not super stoked about that.
Right, right. Yeah, so that that could be interesting as well, and I guess just for anybody who likes to role play a Nord character, they might want to head up there and check that out as well. So we've been talking a little bit about the sort of political implications and some of the I guess influences at least that we have in the conceptual sort of makeup of the great houses, but um, what can you tell us so far about the sort of hierarchy? Because I know in in the original vanilla release, when you join the great houses, there's always sort of a hierarchy, and the Elder Scrolls games are sort of just known for this now, that you join a faction and then you work up through the ranks. So, what kind of ranking system is there set up for Indoril and the mainland Redoran, and how does that tie into the vanilla game as well?
Yeah, so the structure of the houses in the original game is sort of not really expanded on, and in general, ranks are sort of tokens that the player gets as they advance. And I think that because the houses are supposed to be these like fraternal um, patronage kind of organizations that are native and that are politically important, unlike say the guilds.
Hmm.
With their rankings, we wanted to sort of make them make a little more sense and be um, related to roles and within the sort of a social structure. And so, and also to be more differentiated from each other. In the original game, Tavani's ranks were all sort of their own, but Redoran and Hlalu were, I think, almost identical, or maybe were identical up until the final few ranks.
Yeah, I think all the houses had the first like four, up until like
Yeah,
Retainer. I think it was all the same. So
right.
are we gonna change that, or is it still gonna follow the same model?
No, they're new ranks. All houses were going to have the first two ranks be the same. So on the mainland, in the final version, the idea for the houses is that because in the original game, kind of joining a house was sort of no thing. They asked you if you wanted to join, and you said yes, and then
Right.
you were, and then I think
They have a very low bar on Vardenfell.
right, and there's like an attempt to make it a little more special by having the first two ranks be called hireling and retainer. And so if you're paying attention and you know what those words mean, you know that um, they kind of just mean that you're like working for the house and you're not actually a member.
Right, and you're sort of
But
a mercenary in a sense. And and
right,
and Vardenfell is very much because it's just been opened up, and so it's a lot of, I guess, soldier of fortune type people sort of just are hanging out there, mercenary types.
right. And so with the mainland, what we wanted to do with all five of the houses is have um, there'd be a few quests of working for the house before you're actually given an offer to join. That if you try to join, they just you have to prove your worth first. And once you do that, then all houses begin with the Oathman and then Kinsman ranks, which beginning with so Oathman would be someone who's taken an oath to serve the house but hasn't actually been fully initiated, and then it is the advancement to the second rank is um, like there's some sort of initiation, maybe a ceremony, but if we can script NPC behavior to work that well, or at least something that feels like a ceremony. Um, and then beyond that, the ranks completely diverge from each other. Um, so with the Indoril ranking. There's sort of an attempt to create a sort of a very a sort of nobility with the higher ranks, and with this sense of being
And
a very rigid hierarchy,
it
and
also
also
ties
very
in with
like
the temple as well, right?
right. And so like both very religious and centered around religion, and also sort of um, I don't know how to say um,
Like
elitist, I guess,
yeah.
and like um, so I could just name ranks that their counselors, for example, are called illuminated elders, which are elders of the house who have been illuminated by the light of the tribunals, and so they get to vote and so on
Hmm.
because they have particularly strong guidance that has been given to them by the temple through some religious ceremony. Um, Whereas with Redoran, their counselors are called Scar counselors. Scar for the Scar, where they meet, which is, of course, in Alderun.
Right, right.
And so there's this more sense of them as being a council of war, whereas the Indoril are this sort of council of, and that's more administrative, more permanent, more ritualistic.
Right, right. And we definitely talked about sort of the ritualistic sort of concept behind House Indoril.
Mhm.
So I was reading like some of the descriptions under the ranks in Indoril, and I was kind of interested because um, there's a lot stuff here. Like I'm looking at Creed Man, and it's the lowest rank of nobility, and you have to be affirmed by St. Dylan's Creed. And then if I'm like looking, I'm moving up, and then you have to take up arms in a house war, and the higher ranks are if you've taken up arms in a house war, if you've successfully participated in a house war. So there's like these very specific sort of um, I guess uh, rules, or not necessarily rules, but I guess like things you have to do. There's a certain word for things you have to do. What is it? Requirements. There we go. It's a nice word to
Right.
use. And whereas on
Because,
well, whereas in vanilla, it was sort of like, ah, you gotta do like two or three things and come back, and
yeah. Right. I think that the vanilla quests sort of um, they didn't have a lot of narrativity to them. The house quests, they kind of just were things that happened, and then you did something for someone, and they're like, oh, that's great. So I guess you're a house brother now.
yeah,
Um, Whereas with these, trying to um, create more of a central drive to each house's quest line, which is still in like the early stages of formation, but just sort of we know that we want each house to have like a thing that is the sort of central thing happening with it. And so for Indoril, we were presented with a problem, which is that with this sense of them being so rigid and hierarchical, how do we allow the player who's an outlander who entered a month ago to advance through their ranks? And so one thing that we're tossing around is that um, in the original game, house wars are kind of implied and suggested that there's a house war is not like an all-out war, but it's
it's a
a
more
sort of
formal kind of.
right. It's like these weird rules of like proper etiquette of nobles fighting nobles
It's
in a
very
way
sort
that
of medieval chivalry
yeah.
kind of, yeah.
Yeah, and so we had the idea that the Indoril engage in a pretty serious house war, and through the players' good service in that war, they're like able to prove their worth for advancement, and whereas normally they would not be able to advance very far.
And so
Um,
there's also this idea that there's going to be a house war then with House Endoril, and so there's definitely an antagonistic relationship between House Endoril, who's sort of seen as losing influence, and some of the other houses.
right,
And I think House Halalu is figured pretty prominently in that.
right. Palu and Telvanni, and maybe Dress even to a certain extent, are all sort of encroaching on Indoril's territory and on um, like they once controlled the entire Three River Valley. Now they only control the right bank of it, and the other
Right.
half of it is gone to Palu. And um, some of the Telvanni settlements might be implied to sort of be like Morag or Altbazara are sort of Telmathada, like that is territory that once would have been Indoril's, but now the Telvanni are encroaching on it,
I
and
think we
sort of
had
their
I think we had at some point we had Telmuth Rivra where we had sort of a storyline going, and I guess we'll get into this in a minute as well because um, we had sort of an older concept I think for what was going on up in map 1 and 2, but basically settlements that used to be in the temple's sort of sphere of influence, or the temple and Indoril sphere of influence, and Telvanni has sort of crept in and been moving south
right
progressively.
because Indoril's weak, and so they're sort of failing, and this house war will probably be well, because if the players participating in it on the Indoril side, then the players taking up the Indoril's mission, and so the Indoril will make a certain kind of comeback through the quest, because if the player's playing their quest, then they have to win.
Right, right.
But maybe not such a great comeback. Like maybe it'll be sort of Pyrrhic in a certain sense with
Yes,
them,
yeah.
um, because unless they significantly change the way that they behave, and I
They're
think
gonna
that
be
one
they're gonna become sort of irrelevant in the future.
right, and I think one thing we wanted to do was sort of imply the red year and sort of foreshadow that a little bit, because we have the advantage of being 10 years after Morrowind's release, so we've heard about future stories. And so I think that with the Indoril especially, we want to, what with the tribunal disappearing and stuff, we wanted to foreshadow that Morrowind's doom is imminent,
Yeah.
even beyond the present problems.
And I mean, so much of what we're doing with this mod, now that, I think TR has really matured to the point where we're not just talking about building a playground, for our characters anymore. Uh, and I think which is a lot of what people focus on. And it's really the tangible progress, which is, the landmass, the exteriors, the interiors that get finished, and we've done so much of that so far. We've got such a huge bulk of the province finished. We're all the way up through, what was our original map 5. We have 5 out of 6 maps, almost complete at this point. And so the meat of the game though really is the story behind it, and um, to me that's really where TR has gone from a very young sort of project of, we're just getting our legs, under us, trying to build the physical game world, and now we've really sat down and we've really had these discussions about um, what's the character of these people that we're putting in here? What's the story behind it? What do we want to make? And so, we really have this very, yeah, and I'm really stoked about it. I'm really happy about this, the level of detail that's going in, and the level of thought that's gone in. But um, so we've gotten to that point, and it all really deals so much with the change in Morrowind and the transition that you go through. And I think, at least from my standpoint, and I know I'm biased because I'm in the project as well, but just you play the vanilla game and it sets you up, and it's like, oh, the tribunal are kind of fucked. Well, that sucks. And but you don't really get to feel the impact for it. And I think we get to sort of show that what is the impact of what really does it mean for the tribunal temple to disappear, and what ramifications does that have? And it gets talked about, in dialogue, but you never really get to experience it. So I think this is going to be really exciting to sort of, play through this.
Yeah, and I think that one of the criticisms that Morrowind got was sort of that it was a game where um, you didn't really have consequences for your actions a lot of the time. Like building the stronghold was, I think, in the vanilla game, sort of the only thing that you could actually do that would change the way the game worked.
Right.
Change the like had any impact outside of your own self, other than just killing NPCs, I guess. And I know Blood Moon shows a lot of like work on trying to let the player have more of an impact and on the game, let the player have more choices. I think that we really wanted to go in that direction even further and have participating in certain quest lines, especially the house quests, really like the players' participation in those quests has a real impact on what happens in Morrowind.
Right.
And that you can see and you can feel the changes that are happening in Morrowind as you play through the game, instead of it just being sort of a moment, like, because in the original game it was very much just one moment in time, and we wanted things to change a little bit as the player plays through quests based on which quests the player plays.
Absolutely. And I think we also sort of have, I mean, it's a blessing and a curse because it is a mod project, so we have a lot of leeway in what we want to do. We're not really being held to a schedule, although our fans obviously think about that
Right.
first, and so we want to have something for people to play. It's not just about us, but we have sort of that leeway in what we can do. We don't have to be held to sort of a rigid, we need to do X, Y, and Z and get it done by, this date and get it out the door. Um, and I mean, a lot of the criticism I think for Morrowind is it's interesting because it's a game that's over 10 years old now, and I think it's a testament to um, the uniqueness, the sort of novel qualities that the game brought. It really brought you into sort of an alien landscape, um, and was so immersive for so many people that they keep coming back to play, and there's still that interest in it. But again, it's a 10-year-old game, and so there were a lot of limitations on what the devs back then were really sort of comfortable doing to release this game. And 10 years later, and you know, the boundaries of this game have really been pushed beyond what I think it was ever originally conceived of being. If you look at like the graphics modifications, and I know I just recently I played through I replayed the main quest like about a month ago with the new I don't know if you've seen it, the Morrowind graphics overhaul or whatever it is. It's just, and it looks so much better. It stays
Right.
true to I think it stays true to the original sort of you know nature of the game, but a lot of people have been working to try to update it. Most of our screenshots I think now are done by I think Kat and Neiman and Avon. They all do a lot of screenshots. I think most of our screenshots, Haplo as well. All our screenshots pretty much come from them, and they're all usually running some sort of enhanced graphics enhancer mod as well. So you don't really see vanilla screenshots anymore, and so we've pushed the game in that sense. But also just what we're comfortable doing as far as questing and storyline. It doesn't have to be simplistic anymore. It can be so much more. So we've it's an old
Right.
game, but we're making it do new things as well.
Yeah, I mean, the original quests, all of them except for one faction, were done by one person over the course of about a year and a half or less, maybe. And so, um, we're um, dozens of people working over much longer time scale than that. Um, so we really are taking the opportunity to um, push the Morrowind engine to do um, more in like maybe less railed quests and also more consequential quests, and to make the game um, to open up what kinds of things the player will be able to do in the game.
Yeah, yeah. So I think I can't wait. I know we had some sort of practice with that on the earlier releases, and I think we'll talk about that later because I think we'll do Telvanni and we'll do another one of these little like podcast type things. I think about like Telvanni and some of the other great houses as well. So, but this is I think the first big showcase of what we really want to do with the mod is really going to be in the last. It's going to be in the Indoril releases. I feel at least this is really where everything has sort of come together, and we're really firing on all cylinders at this point. So we'll see how that works out.
Yep.
So all right, awesome. So that was House Redoran, House Indoril. Ladies and gentlemen, Sload, thank you very much for filling me in and just sort of explaining what's going on over in Quest and Storyland.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I know the exterior modding department sometimes, at least sometimes I don't, because I just do the reviews and like, And I don't understand anything about questing, man. I tried a couple times, but I'm just I'm just like quest illiterate. I can't make it work.
Yeah, it's
It's a
yeah.
special skill set. So if anybody out there has that skill set, come on over to the forums. We'd love to have you.
We love questers.
Yeah, yeah, questers and modelers.
Yeah,
Yeah, we need modelers. So we're gonna. Oh Christ, we can talk about modelers with House Drez, can't we?
yeah, because uh, Res is interesting, right? Because it's got whole new models. It's even the architecture has never been seen. Nothing of House Dress is ever seen in the original game. So that'll be
Yeah, yeah,
something where we have a lot of almost terrifyingly no restrictions because we have to also come up with something good.
yeah, and
But we're doing it, and it's going to
that
be great.
runs as well. If
Yeah.
anybody is curious, you can go on. Oh God, I don't know why we still have it. The screenshots on our website.
Do we still have the old dress set
Yes,
on
we
there
do. Yes, we do. If
with
you
the
the
spaceship towers and stuff?
yeah, the black ones, yeah.
Yeah.
Supposedly they had like an obscene like poly count as well that would like like when people used to play it, it used to like crash their game.
Yeah.
I've never it doesn't it probably the ESP files probably exists on somebody's flash drive in somebody's drawer somewhere.
Yeah.
And they should all just be destroyed. They really should be.
Yeah. Well, I
All
mean,
those
the story that they have behind them too is great, but
the
I don't
spaceship
know. We
towers.
shouldn't hate on our past so much.
Oh yeah, I know. But it is interesting to see what the progression has been. If anybody's really curious, I mean, they're there. You can go on the screenshot page and look at what used to be there. That's a completely different world that we used to be in.
Yeah, our screenshots are all from about at least 5 years ago.
That
Probably longer than that
Oh, much
now.
longer than that. 2004, 2005 maybe.
Yeah. So when we were first joining, and then the screenshots, I mean, they got us to join, so maybe they'll still are getting
Yeah,
other people
I
to
know.
join. But
I think it was
yeah.
something about how like stupid huge some things were built, like the
Right.
old
I mean,
Everheart.
yeah,
And
that was our thing back then was that we just made everything bigger
yeah,
than you'd ever seen it before.
it's mainland, man, so it's got to be fucking bigger, right?
Yeah, that's all we really had going for us. Our only idea was to just do everything but bigger and more extreme
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
and more waterfalls.
sort of grown up, I guess, from that. So
Yeah.
yeah. All right. Well, okay. So that's again House Redoran and House Indoril. You can check out the screenshots that we have of Almalexia and a lot of the other Bon Malor, a lot of the big cities that we have finished in those upcoming releases on our Facebook page, and I'll link that in the video as well. And where else can you look it up? We have a Tumblr now. For
We
whatever
do, and I think that might have some pictures.
We have a Tumblr that has pictures on it. You can go. Where else? Where else do we keep a repository of pictures? We post them up on the forums from time to time as well, so you can head over to the forums. Um, what other? We're really working on like public access. Oh, and on the YouTube channel as well, we have a lot of flyover videos of I think Heartland and Almalexia and stuff like that as well. So you can check that out. Um, yeah, and you know, stay tuned. Stay posted for those upcoming releases, and I can't wait to get to play this new storyline. It sounds really awesome.
Yeah. All right.
All right, man. All right,
Yeah.
thanks for giving us your time, and thanks everybody for tuning in. See everybody later.
See ya. Bye.
Bye bye.